What's up, Psychonauts? Welcome back to the podcast. Today, I am super excited because Brian Kelly is joining me. He is the founder of Yogi Lab. He has created so many beautiful things, lead breath coach with BreathMasters, and is currently bringing this phenomenon to the world with 9D breathwork. This is actually how I got on this call today because I got the email to sign up with what they were offering, and I was blown away with this experience of the 9D breath work that I was like, how do I become a part of this team? This is definitely my gas pedal to like start my healing journey even further and help even more people. So, Brian, welcome to the podcast today.
Thank you, Jess. It's good to be here.
Yeah. Okay. So I have like a million questions for you, but I know that, let's be conscious of the clock. And so my first one would be, how did you discover the 9D breath work?
Yeah, it's a great place to start, I suppose. So it's an interesting story because, they say that some of the best innovations come as a result of solving the deepest frustrations. And that's essentially how 9D was born. What happened was when COVID came around and I brought everything online, I was doing online monthly transformational breathwork journeys. And this was even before we had launched BreathMasters. And they got to become wildly popular because they were, there was very few people actually bringing a spoken narrative into the breathwork process. And so every month I'd have a theme, not unlike the themes that we have in the 9D experiences. And this one particular week, I was guiding a stress and anxiety release transformational breathwork journey. And I don't know what happened that day, but the internet was just an absolute sham. It's usually relatively reliable in Bali, but on this particular day, this fateful day that I'm very grateful for now, looking back at it in hindsight, the internet was terrible. And I remember listening to the session back after because I wanted to see how the sound quality was, and it was so bad. It was chopping in and out, and there was 150 people or something on that call, and I was pretty embarrassed that they had to experience the session that way, me coming in, coming out. And so what happened was it put me into this kind of deep frustration. And I was trying to figure out, how am I going to solve this sound issue? Obviously I can't fix the internet, but how am I going to solve this sound issue? And so what happened was that was the last thing that I was thinking about before I went to sleep. And so I must have just slept on it all night. And I have no idea what happened in dream time, but when I woke up in the morning, it was like an explosion that had taken place through the night. And it was like so obvious. There was so many details that were there, and it even had the name was there already, 9D breathwork. And how that kind of came to be, I suppose, in my unconscious was this whole idea of 9D sound had been presented to me, like, I don't know, a year before. Somebody sent me a 9D experience, this traveling stereo sound
Mm.
experience. And it was like an electronic dance song or something. And so I remember it highlighted as fascinating, but no practical use for it at all whatsoever, other than that it was interesting. And so that was in the field. And so when I thought, all right, essentially what happened was I came out and I thought, sound experience, like if I'm having trouble with sound, let's record it in advance.
Hmm.
And I had this thought of like bringing 9D soundscape, and what that does is it's not just traveling stereo sound, it creates like a whole universe of space for people. And the second I started to go down that track, all the other dominoes started to fall. Well, if we're working with sound, what else can I do with sound? And I already knew about binaural beats, and I knew that there's going to be other things that I could do with frequency. And so it gets into a funnier story from there, because I started to Google, it's like, 9D breathwork, experiences, thinking there's got to be somebody else that's doing this. Like, breathwork's big, 9D sound is big. Sure, someone must have connected the dots already, obviously. And there wasn't anything I could find even remotely close to it. And so I thought, well, you know what? I'm just going to make one and see what happens. Next thing I'm Googling, how do you create 9D sound? Thinking I was going to do it myself. And so I like found some softwares, and I realized very quickly, I'm like, who am I? I'm not a sound engineer. I'm not going to make this myself. I had experience with Upwork. I'm like, all right, somebody's got to be able to do this on Upwork. And so I put it into Upwork. All right, I need somebody to create something like this. And it was just this like 40 something inch sound engineers got back to me within the first 24 hours. It's like,
Wow.
no, how am I going to select through all these
Oh,
people? Like,
wow.
they all say they can do it. I'm like, all right, I'll put a filter in there. Anybody that wants to do this with me, send me a 30-second, a 10-second clip just to prove that you can do it. Right.
Hmm.
And so that narrowed it down. Like only 7 of them put through this clip, but one guy put through a clip and he took a beautiful Krishnamurti monologue and he dropped it on some amazing music and dropped it into 9D. And when I heard it, it was like I saw God. It was like
Mm.
unreal. Like tears came in my eyes because I realized, wow, I'm onto something here. Like it didn't take long for me to realize that I was onto something. And he didn't do just 10 seconds, he did 30, and it
Mm.
blew me away. And I was like, all right, that's it. I got into the lab, I got the script together, I recorded the vocals, I sent them to the guy. We went back and forth a couple times. And when I listened to the first release of The Man in the Mirror from the original Letting Go experience that you're very familiar with at this point, I'm sure. When I
Yeah.
listened to that, I just cried because I knew. I was like, this is gonna do something for the world. Like I could feel it. And that was the beginning of 9D.
Oh, that's such a cool story. I'm glad that I have like all of it now because I'm like, I know a little bit of it, but you don't say that much in classes. So,
Yeah,
um,
there's obviously a lot more than that, but that's the cliff.
That's amazing. Okay, so explain to people because like I know my first experience, I was like, what the fuck just happened to me? So explain to people like what this does, like subconsciously, consciously, and like the way that you coach through it is phenomenal. And just like, yeah, if you care to
Yeah,
share.
sure. Yes, sure. So, I mean, the magic of breath work, really, if you whittle it down, is we're getting people out of their mental overly thinking activity, and we're getting them down into the subconscious and the unconscious domain, which is the body, and the body is where we carry everything, right? As you know, many of your listeners might not. Like this is where we carry all of our old stories and complexes and traumas and generational traumas and everything that everything that influences how we think, how we act, how we feel, all our behaviors, all our patterns, all our nervous tics. It's all in the body. And so the magic is when we get down into the body, we get down into the terrain that allows us to release that stuff relatively quickly. And so the breath is what takes us there. And the breath
Mm,
is infinitely wise, and it knows exactly where to go in order to be able to shake things around, in order to be able to dislodge some of this stuff. And the beautiful part is that when you bring in a spoken narrative, and this is kind of the magic of 9D and transformational breathwork, the way that we teach it, we're not relying on solely the breath to be able to consciously go to where it needs to go. We're navigating people directly to the things that they need to work
mhm,
on. And the reality is, if you whittle back the human condition, what people are struggling with is not such a vast array of things. It's not like an encyclopedia of things. It really boils down to like 20 or 30 core things that people are struggling with, self-worth issues, self-judgment issues, the different traumas of rejection and imprints and shame and abandonment and embarrassment and what all these things lead to, and issues with love and issues with money and issues with relationship in general, relationship with self, relationship with other. So since there's all these core things, what the narrative does, if we were to have a conversation and we were to say, all right, let's talk about your self-love issues, Jess, let's unpack this for a second. Now it's like we're in the realm of psychotherapy, right? And it's like all your walls are going to go up because
mhm.
we're very much consciously beta brainwave state. You're analyzing, I mean, you trust me now, but if we didn't know each other,
Yeah.
how can I trust this guy? What's he saying? It's all of your beliefs are there getting in the way and acting as filters. It's very challenging to get through. This is the issue that I have with psychotherapy. It's like once
Mm,
you figure out the struggle, that's great. Now you figured out why you feel fucked. But the reality is you're still going to feel fucked. Like until you actually do something about it, unless there's a somatic element to how am I going to release this thing that's trapped in my body? Because you understanding that you have father issues is great to raise that in awareness, but where are you carrying that in your body? And how is that affecting how you operate in the world? That's, you're carrying it somewhere. And so this is the issue. So what breathwork does is it allows you to release that trapped emotion, or those unconscious beliefs that are stored in your unconscious and your subconscious. So when we're doing it consciously, that's the barrier of that approach. But when you're doing it, when you're delivering the same kind of messages and reframes inside of a breathwork experience, we've navigated away from all the conscious activity. Now we're down into the subconscious, and we're a open vessel to be able to receive. You know, we're highly suggestible. We're down into we're slowing down our brain waves. And so we're getting into theta brainwave state, alpha brainwave state, gamma brainwave state. And this is where we were when we picked up all this nonsense that we're carrying around. When we were born, all the way up until primarily when we were 1.5, 2 years old, all the way until we're 8 years old, we're walking around. Our brain waves are still slow. We're not thinking as much as we are feeling and absorbing. And we're absorbing our entire reality, everything that's going on around us, all the toxic behaviors that we were exposed to, all the terrible belief frames that we were exposed to, all the stuff from the media, the stuff from indoctrination from schools, our parents unknowingly handing us the stuff down from their parents and not realizing it. You know, we're soaking all of that up. We're essentially walking around in a state of hypnosis for the first 7 or 8 years of our life, and we're carrying, and then we wonder why we're still holding on to those beliefs as adults, because we've never figured out a way to work through them. And so when we're getting into this breathwork activated state, we're mimicking what happened when we were children. We're slowing down our brainwaves. So all of a sudden now, the words that I speak to you, they're not going through all the filters and beliefs and ideologies and limited viewpoints and perceptions of the world. It's going directly into your subconscious domain, and you're highly suggestible, because when you're in theta state, you're essentially in a state of operational hypnosis, essentially. And so the guidance that I provide is like, you can, instead of trying to make sense of it analytically and consciously, you're absorbing it subconsciously. And so now all of a sudden you have all of these challenges. Essentially the entire operation of 9D breathwork and the themes and narratives, it's a massive reframing exercise. It's like, okay, you perceived the challenges in your life as these dark, terrible things that you've had to navigate through and struggle through and suffer through. And you have all of this, I just need to get out of this. I just want to feel better. And now all of a sudden you start to, as a result of the narrative and the journey that we take people on, now all of a sudden your frame is, wow, thank you for these amazing things that have happened to me in my life that have created the landscape to allow me to expand and grow and evolve my understanding. And so now, now we have the ability to look at all these things that have happened in our life as the greatest gifts that allowed for the potential for massive transformation in a very short period of time. And that's the power of just a little bit of what encompasses to make this entire 90 breathwork experience.
There's so many questions coming up for me right now. I'm like, just pick one, Jess. So this podcast is based off of like magic and psychedelics, because that's just where my life has gone. And what I'm noticing within breathwork, and like I've done it before in sessions, like that DMT that like naturally just gets released in your body. So I'd love you to talk like the science part of like why choose a breathwork session over, let's say, a psilocybin journey to dig deep into what you need to process?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, first of all, I got nothing against plant medicines and psychedelics. I've experimented with plenty of it in my life, some consciously, some incredibly unconsciously, non-ceremoniously. So I have nothing against it. They say to get into the subconscious domain, it's to a state of hypnosis and into the subconscious domain, it requires you either to be hypnotized or to take plant medicines or to go really deep into meditation. Those are kind of the three main ways of getting in there. The challenge that I've have with psychedelics is that a lot of times what people report, myself included, is you go into this really deep altered state of consciousness, and then you come out And if you don't have somebody there to that really understands the landscape for how to
Mm.
enter that, it can leave you feeling very lost, confused, almost fractured. There's a lot of people that would throw stones and say that you're kind of fracturing a part of your psyche in there. And so if you don't know how to responsibly navigate your way through that, that could potentially do more harm than good. And there's plenty of real life experiences of people coming out of psychedelic experiences going into a relapse of massive suffering. And
Mm.
so it's not to say that that will happen every time, because it definitely doesn't. However, if not done consciously, respectfully to the medicine with the right person, there's a landscape of challenges that can occur. And so when people are snapping back from that, and all of a sudden, next thing you know, a few days go by and people feel, wow, I feel kind of back to exactly where I was before. Maybe I have some insights. Maybe I have some aha moments. For me, the insights and the aha moments, it's like with psychedelics, it's more about like, wow, there's this whole world that exists beyond my senses that I find to be very interesting and eye-opening. And perhaps it gives me a little bit of insight as to how to not so narrowly perceive the world around me strictly by my senses. And so I think if you work with somebody that really knows their stuff in the psychedelic space, there's a lot of potential there for expansion and for growth. But the breath work kind of removes all the complications around all of that.
Mhm.
Our breath is the most natural drug that we have access to as humans from the moment that we're born until the moment that we die. And we have the ability to get into these altered states without any additional substance. Breath is this, as I say quite frequently, is the Sanskrit word for spirit. What we're doing when we get into a breathwork experience, we're activating spirit in a really amazing way. And then we're trusting that this activation of spirit will give us the healing that we need in order to be able to better navigate our life. So it takes, for me, the difference between breathwork and psychedelics is it just takes all the risk and complexity
Mm.
out of the equation. And it's something anybody can do at any time at will. It's like, you don't need me to do breath work. This is what I'm always kind of screaming at people. It's like, technically, you don't need 9D, you don't need BreathMasters, you don't need Brian Kelly. You need willpower and maybe some good music and a room to drop it, to decide to drop in and go deep. Now, are there people out there who feel, okay, well, yeah, that may be true. However, I would feel a lot safer if I had access to a trained facilitator to do that, because I don't know what will come up. Yeah, of course. Absolutely. Your first couple deep dive journeys, you should probably do with a facilitator. But once you have an idea of how your operating system works, then there's nothing stopping you. I'm sure you've probably done some journeys at your house by yourself in your room without assistance. And that's one of the elements of 9D that I think holds the most potential over time,
Mm.
which is, until now, to do a guided somatic breathwork journey required one of two things. It required you to either have access to a facility and a place that is guiding these sessions, or have access to a coach that's guiding the sessions live, whether online or whether in person. And what 9D does, it says, okay, well, the world is going digital and not everybody has access to those two things. So anybody with an internet and the willpower that it takes to navigate through, the instructions on how to do it safely can be delivered in video format in advance, which is what we do. And someone can take a deep dive by themselves in their room in a remote part of the world where they just don't have access to these things. And some of the most amazing testimonials that I've ever heard were from those people that did that initial letting go journey by themselves in their house, deeply traumatized. I'm sure you've heard me talk about the story of Sherry.
Mhm.
Sherry, yeah, it's like kidnapped and held hostage and essentially tortured, and God only knows what else. At
Yeah.
7 years old, carried trauma, 60 years, barricading her bedroom door closed, 60 years, couldn't figure out how to kick it, one breathwork journey, and was able to resolve, this massive 60-year trauma that she held. I wasn't there. None of my facilitators were there. It was digital Brian and Sherry in a bedroom with headphones. And I feel like that, if she can do that, for me,
Mm.
what that did for me, other than being over the moon excited by the fact that she had that experience, and how could I not be? the potential that carried. It's like you're not going to find that many people that have that kind of that level of trauma. I mean, they're of course you can't really compare and contrast different people's traumas, but when you're talking about big T trauma, that's not like just a big T, that's like a really big T. And
Mm-hmm.
if she can conquer that really big T, it kind of sets a precedent for what's possible to resolve for essentially everyone else,
Mm-hmm.
because as you've heard me talk about before, Jess, is like one of the biggest misconceptions about trauma is only people with sexual abuse, or only people that lost a parent, or only people that have a big accident or come back from war. These are only the people that have trauma. And but
Mm-hmm.
as you know, that's absolutely the most farthest, it couldn't be further from the truth. It's like 8 billion. How many people there are on the planet? That's how many people there are that have trauma from their past. And so the dawn of breath work is the golden chalice to resolve all of that, as far as I'm concerned.
I will, yeah, 100%. Not only the stories that you tell, but what I've seen in myself. And like, I have literally been on a mission. Like, I was on a mission before, but once I started doing your breath work, I'm like, there's a fire under my ass that I needed so bad. And I was like, this is amazing.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what did you find first? Was it like an ayahuasca ceremony? Was it breath work? Like, what modality did you find first that made you choose breath work?
Well, I definitely didn't find breath work first. I found ayahuasca and psilocybin and LSD. I found all the psychedelic stuff first, plus the ceremonial plant medicine stuff.
Mm.
And so I suppose that the priming was there already. So when I found breathwork, the first guy that I did a breathwork session with as a breather, he was a breather sitting next to me. What he shared, I witnessed his miraculous healing. Essentially, that's how I got so fascinated by it. It was powerful for me. I could feel it for me, but what I witnessed in him was a miraculous level healing event. I
Mm.
couldn't believe it, to be honest. It shook my world because he was struggling with so many things. He had all so many conditions that this guy was struggling with. He was an insomniac. He was struggling with massive stress and anxiety, depression. The skin tone was pale, and he was just going through a really challenging time of his life. There's a whole story there. We'll leave it for another day because I know we're limited for time. And so when he came out of this breathwork journey, first of all, I witnessed an exorcism next to me. I didn't see it, but I heard the sounds of it. And it was like the sounds that were coming from this man was the most I had never. It was screaming, it was crying, it was shouting, it was sobbing. It was every sound that a human being could make, he made in that hour. And so at the end of it, his testimony was what got me. He said, and I'm paraphrasing, he said, of all the things I've ever done, and this is a guy that has done it all, under everything under the sun. And he had
Mm.
all the certificates to prove all the accolades and accomplishments he had done hanging on his wall. Proper human being that had done a lot of the work. I'll never say all because it's impossible.
Right.
Uh, he said, of all the things I've ever done, all the meditation retreats, all the plant medicines, all the ayahuascas, he listed off all these things, and I can't remember all of them, but there was a lot. He said that was he had never done breathwork before. That was the most powerful 1 hour experience of my entire life.
Wow.
And with tears in his eyes. And I'm just like, what is happening here? Like it was so obvious how healing this was for him. And when we saw him the next day, he reported it was the first time he had slept all the way through the night, 10 or 12 hours, can't remember the number, without taking a single sleeping pill. And it was as if it looked like he slept in a tanning bed because his pale, pasty white skin had complexion. And it was the nighttime. How is that possible?
Yeah.
And so I think that, and I don't know if it was in this moment, but it was very shortly after where I started wondering very quickly, why aren't we teaching this to kids in schools? Why doesn't everybody know about this? Why am I just finding out about this now? I'm in my 30s. Like this, I should have been aware of this a long time ago. And why aren't we prescribing it as medicine in clinics instead of, or in lieu of, all these terrible pharmaceutical medications that we're just pumping people with without even questioning if there's a more healthy alternative holistic route? It's like you know, don't get me started on big pharma, as I have big stones to throw in that
I'll help
direction. But
you.
yeah, and you know, really what the end point to this little story, this little rant here, is that what's really exciting, what's happening in our community now is all of those original questions are now being answered. We launched our school project 90 yesterday. You know, we got 9D that's about to get into the hands of veterans struggling with PTSD. If when that's successful, it will be prescribed by Veterans Affairs. We're getting ready to roll out program very soon, very early next year for addiction and recovery. Like it's going to get in the hands of all the AA people all around the world. Anybody struggling with addiction and recovery. So it's like if we want to, I think the big realization for me, Jess, is if that's the world I want to live in, then I got nowhere else to turn but the mirror. And essentially that's what we're all now doing together with these programs. It's an exciting time.
It is a very exciting time and like honored to be a part of it because I was like, well, okay, BreathMasters, sure. And then I was like, what's this 90 thing? I was like, now I need to do both. Like, I know this is going to
Compliment each
be,
other.
it's going to be such a game changer. And I love that you're bringing it into schools and like the veterans and everything that you're doing is just so, so cool. So you've said in class or in the videos, I don't know, because I see you so often on the internet. You're like, your upbringing was very like stable and like your parents loved you, right?
A lot.
So yeah, and I love that this is what you're doing with having that background. But like you said, it doesn't matter. Every single person on this planet has trauma, especially after 2020. Like every single person, 100%. So how did you get into this breathwork session that changed your life? Like what brought you there?
Yeah, it's a good question. It was at a time where it was circa, oh gosh, when would that have been? Circa not that long ago, 2017, 2018, somewhere in that area. And at the time, I was, I was in, I was juggling a lot of responsibility, and so I was a new parent. I was already parenting a child who, for years, was my partner's child. So I was already parenting one, but I was becoming a first-time biological parent. At the same time, managing the development of two businesses,
Mm.
and that were incredibly labor intensive. Like I was chief operations officer for one of them, and then I was co-founder of Yogi Lab for the other, and Yogi Lab was intense amounts of work, really heavy duty. And so I'm trying to figure out how to hold myself together during this time. And I was really, you know what, I was really good at bullshitting myself.
Mm.
Like it takes hindsight looking back at some of these things. Like I convinced myself I was not just okay, but doing great. But my body was telling me otherwise. And I think it required me to lie to myself. Well, we call it self-deception. It's like such a common thing. I was lying to myself to get through it, because what was happening was I was trying to get myself back into practice, but I'd been out of practice for a while. I didn't have like a solid routine in place. I was drinking a ton of coffee. My adrenals were shot. My nervous system was probably shot 8 ways from Sunday. And so I was exhausted and I was tired, and I was doing my best to hold it all together. And I just thought, this is what the hustle looks like. This is the grind. This is what I signed up for. I was that archetype. Like, we're gonna do it, let's do it. But the reality was I was struggling on the inside. And so when we got invited to do this session as a team for 90 breathwork, we were going into this big transformational it was a 90-day body transformation challenge experiment. Like, let's see how well we can do with just like getting really into fitness for 90 days. So it was the first experiment that we did with Yogi Lab before we figured out what Yogi Lab even was, right? If we're gonna be living in our body, let's figure out what we can do to optimize our body. And it was at this time that this guy came over. He was our coach, the guy who I just told you about. He was going to be our coach for the 90 days. And so when we got invited into this session, there was 8 or 9 of us, And that was the beginning. It was like that was the light bulb. I had experienced a little bit of breathwork before. Like I experienced my first little, there's two little parts that planted a seed. Number one was when I was building, maybe 2 years before, I was a project director for a big build project here in Bali. I had no experience doing it, and
Mm.
so somebody asked me to do it, and I was like, I'll figure this out. That's just kind of who I am. And there was one particular launch day where I was so overly stimulated. I couldn't calm down. There was so much fight or flight. No one had ever taught me how to use my breath. I was so fight or flight, sympathetic nervous system activated. I went to my friend who I knew was a body worker, and I said, do you got any quick hacks that we could do to calm my nerves? And he guided me through like a minute of breath of fire. And I
Mhm.
had never done breath of fire. And like he could have easily taught me like something to down regulate, but he wanted to help me kind of shock my system. And so we did this breath of fire. After a minute, it was like, whoa, I was clear and I could sense and I could feel what was going on. I felt relaxed. And I was like, whoa, no one ever told me about this before. So all of a sudden it was on the radar. It wasn't the big journey. It wasn't the massive aha moment, but breathwork was on the radar. And so when I found a YouTube video with Wim Hof, maybe a month or two later, I was instantly intrigued. And I did a short Wim Hof session, classic 2 rounds of 30, 1 minute breath hold, how Wim does it. And he was talking about the science of breath holding, and he guided us on a breath hold. And I just remember doing this first breath hold that I've ever done in my life consciously. I remember I'd never been able to hold my breath longer than like a minute was like the peak, and I'm struggling, right? And I remember doing the breath hold, and I had a watch or a phone on or something. And I just remember sitting in this breath hold state, and the hunger never came. And I'm like, what's going on? I'd off gassed all my carbon dioxide. I didn't know what was happening. And I remember looking at my watch when it was time to come out, and 3 minutes had gone by with no training. And I'm like, what is going on here? Like, what's happening in my biochemistry here? Like, that was okay, there's something that's important here that's happening in my life. However, I was really busy. I had things going on. So, but it was very much on the radar. So when I went to do this breathwork final, like somatic experience, that was it. It was like I was the icing on the cake. I didn't need any more convincing. It was all a matter of timing that I felt so amazing after that session. I slept like a baby. I woke up feeling clear. I didn't do any additional substances or anything to get to that point. And I just remember really what I remember most as the imprint from that was just feeling good. Like I just feel good. And I think when you strip away everyone's wants and desires, like the
Mm.
things that people think that they want and the desire and all these things, and you can create a list. I think what's under all of that, really, like one of the things I've discovered is that people just want to feel good. Like forget about like deep blissful happiness and fulfillment. It's like those are great North Stars, like, but you can't feel that way all the time. However, it is possible to feel pretty good most of the time. And I feel like maybe that's one of the things that I've accomplished that I'd like to gift to as many people as I can, because relatively speaking, compared to who I once was in a previous life,
Mm.
I feel pretty damn good most of the time. I have my moments. I don't want anybody to walk away from this thinking that I'm bragging or I'm presenting myself to be the Superman that has it all figured out. I don't. I'm still navigating the things of life that everybody else are. However, for the most part, like I'm grounded, I'm balanced, I'm clear. I have the ability to think through things. I don't like get freaked out by triggers anymore. Really, I get frustrated. I got tools to be able to sort through it, but that's the thing. And it's like if we have this tool that allows people access to the potential to be able to just feel good more often,
Mhm.
I I don't know how you could possibly take that off this massive throne of potential for being able to sort out the human experience, because it's all these traumas, all this stuff that we're carrying around in our body that doesn't allow us to get to that magic spot within ourselves. And the breath is the vehicle that opens up that potential for people. And the more we just feel good, all of a sudden you look around and we're not going to war as much, because we're not going to war as much here.
Mm.
And when we're not going to war within ourselves, we're not going to war outside anymore either. We're not going to war with each other in our relationships. We're not going to war geopolitically with other countries. You know, I'm a bona fide optimist. I truly believe that when people do, if when humanity gets to this critical point of transformation where we all wake up and realize that it's very critically important for the future of humanity for us to do the work on ourselves, then that changes the world in one generation or less.
Yeah.
And so that's where the mission aspect of all of this comes in.
I am so happy that I asked you to be on this podcast because I'm like, fuck yes, absolutely. And that's my mission right now too. It's like the more I work on me, the more I see the world around me changing. And I'm just like, this is the magic spot of change yourself and the whole world changes. And it's so true. So with the comparison to Wim Hof breath work and what you are doing, what is the biggest, because to me, Wim Hof is like an intense breath work. It's like, you better be ready to like go and climb mountains in your underwear and, you know, do that stuff. Um, but to me, your breath work is personally more relatable to people because it's not as intense, like it is, but it's like not Wim Hof intense. What do you think the difference is? Like, why did you choose this route and this?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know that I've ever answered this question before. So let's see what comes out. First of all, I respect and admire the man that is Wim Hof
Mhm.
so much. Like, if it wasn't for him, breathwork wouldn't be as much a thing as it is in the world. And I probably wouldn't be here doing this if it wasn't for Wim Hof. So I greatly respect him. How I'll kind of dodge the bullet of like trying to frame 90 breathwork as better is by this. It's different. First of all, Wim Hof breathwork is very masculine, right?
Mm,
What we do with 90 breathwork, it can be a very powerful combination of both masculine and feminine. You know, I get to be very soft inside of those journeys just as much as I get to be very intense in certain parts. But really the difference is that we've taken things to the next level. It's like 90 breathwork, we call it 90 breath work, but the reality is it's not just breath work in there, is it? It's a lot of other things. And so it's like I always kind of, you know, when I've met a few breath coaches and guided them on breathwork experiences, and it's very common that they come out and go, oh wow, what I'm doing is just they start to diminish their own practice. And I'm like, look, don't get in this trap of comparison. Like, the reason why this is powerful is because we're bringing all these elements in. It's like, it's breath work, it's hypnotherapy induction, it's subliminal messaging, it's all these different things that we're doing, sound and vibration and frequency. And so it's hard to, it's like an apple and an orange. Really, you just can't really compare the two. And so for whatever reason, it's the sweet spot. It's cracked the code, I think. And there's a certain element of me, the humble side of me, that has a really hard time taking credit for it, to be honest, because I feel like I believe in God, and I believe that we all have a mission in this world, whether we got a God-given mission or not. And I feel like God informed that dream that day, and he decided that I was going to be the guy to bring the thing into the world, and I just happened to wear that hat. And so yeah, I don't want to diminish my own, you know, healthy pride around, you know, I get to be the one to carry this torch. However, it's spirit operating through the man that is Brian Kelly. And so I need to, you know, constantly be reminding myself of that. But that's really the difference. It's like there's definitely a place for Wim Hof. I still practice Wim Hof breath work in my free times at times. There's so much of it on YouTube. It's nice to get a little break from my own stuff from time to time. But when we're talking about taking things to the next level in terms of creating a container for highest impact healing environment, I think that we're really onto something big with what we're doing with 9D. And I don't think that based on the creation alone, I believe that because of the myriad of data that we now have to support that across the world, from all the students that we're guiding that are saying, I've done so many things. This is the most powerful thing I've ever done in my life. You know, I've just heard that enough times to not be in imposter syndrome doubt phase about it anymore.
Mm-hmm. That's super cool. And yeah, shout out to Wim Hof. I'd love to have him on here too, but one day maybe. Gotta go take his courses too. Um, So, oh, I just had a great question and then I lost it. But the scream, that's what I want to talk about. What, for those of you that are listening who have not done any of the BreathMasters or the 90 sessions, there is a somatic scream, one or two within the sessions. And what made you bring that in? Like, had you done it before? Because I think like sometimes I'm in yours doing yours, and then I'm like, I don't need the scream today. And then all of a sudden you're like, scream. And I'm like, ah! And it's like this big release. And I'm like crying, and I'm like, I thought I was good today. Like,
Yeah, it's a great, it's not, you're doing great asking me a few questions I've never been asked before. So
yay.
so the scream, before there was 90 breathwork, I was Brian Kelly, the breath coach, and I was guiding a lot of I was doing retreats, and I was guiding a lot of in-person breathwork sessions, and the whole transformational breathwork um element of like guided vocal coaching started as me just shouting things at people in a room, without a script, with no theme or narrative, just kind of being an open channel to what I realized was the more that I activate people with my voice, the more they get activated. It was like it just started happening. And so it's like every journey I was kind of learning something new. And next thing you know, a few sessions in, I'm using my voice a lot and activating people a lot. And I think one day, I don't know if I planned it, how this whole thing happened. I'm not sure. I don't know where I originally got the inspiration from. I think I just got the inspiration. Like, I'm going to get people to hold their breath, and then I'm going to get them to scream. And there wasn't any science involved at that point. It was
Okay.
like, it's an activation. And once I did it once, and I heard the feedback that was reported, I was like, oh, okay. Like, there's something here. Like, there's something here. Like, people was coming back saying, whoa, that scream. And so that's how it became a part of the practice. And then later on, I found out, and I discovered that it's actually a thing. There's a thing called somatic scream therapy, and it's actually very logical. If you think about it, it's like anybody that how if you ask a room of 100, how many people, when they're feeling upset or frustrated, angry or rageful or whatever, vengeful, how many of them have experimented with going outside or into their pillow or whatever, screaming at the top of their lungs? And I've asked this question. Usually no hands go up. Sometimes one hand goes up, two hands go up, because they've done, some of the work. And I'll ask them, how is that for you? The one or two hands. And they'll go, it's fucking amazing. you know, because it's like, the way I say it inside of, before I prep people going on the journeys, I say it's like screaming is like an atomic bomb release of energy from the body, and we don't do it enough. And so it's an important element, because if we're building up all this energy, we're building it all up as the energy needs somewhere. It needs a pressure release valve to get out. Of course, the body is going to process it out within sensation, but I feel like the most natural, intuitive pressure release valve, once you've built up all that energy, is naturally a really good shake or a scream. And a scream just does the job. It's not because I like to watch people suffer as a sadist. There is an element of my appreciation of people suffering in breathwork experiences. I'm not going to lie to you. Like, I like it because I know I can, when I witness someone really struggling through whatever is going on, you know how it is, Jess. This isn't more
Mhm.
so for you. It's more so for the listeners. There's a celebration in that. It's like the second I see tears flowing, it's like there's a celebration in that, because I know what's beyond those tears. I know
Mhm.
what's beyond that scream. I know what's beyond all that movement. I know what's beyond all that struggle. And it's the relief that people have been waiting for their whole life, but they just didn't have an outlet to get it out. And that's the magic of it all.
Mhm. Yep. Absolutely. So those of you that do any of these breath works and you don't want to do the scream, what does Brian Kelly always say? You're the
Yeah, if
ones
you
that
don't
need
tell
it
them
the
it's
most.
coming, if you don't tell them it's coming in the beginning, the odds are they won't actually do it. I call it the scream conversion. The better
Yeah.
you prepare your clients, your breathers, your students that a scream is coming, the higher your conversion rate. But it's an important part of the process. Will it still be healing without? Of course.
Of
But it's
course.
like It's like, are you gonna eat a cake with no frosting on it? Yeah, it's still gonna be good. Or a pizza with no cheese. It's an important ingredient.
It is, and it's definitely why I signed up to become BreathMaster certified, because I was just like, oh, like again, mind blown at what I felt in my body once that release happened. It was like,
Mm.
I've done ayahuasca, I've done mushroom ceremonies, I've done cambo, like bufo, you name it. But that breath work and that release was like, this is the shit that you've been holding on to, that all that other stuff didn't get you here.
Hmm. Yeah, the
Yeah.
natural drugstore.
The natural drugstore, the medicine, the breath is the medicine. It's so good. Awesome. Okay. So being conscious of the time, how do people find you?
How do people find me?
Do you want people to
Let's
find
see.
you?
Yeah, I want people to find me. I should be able to quickly. I get interviewed a lot. I should be able to quickly rattle this off. There's our websites. There's 90breathwork.com. There's breathmasters.com. I think the main place where I'm putting out most of my content is on Instagram. That's at breathwork dot journeys. But there's also 90 breathwork and there's breathmasters on Instagram as well. I feel like between one of those many platforms, that's where you get access to Brian.
Yeah. Very, very cool. And normally I ask a question about psychedelics, but this one I'm going to ask you about breath work because that's our theme today. If you could use one word for your very first breathwork experience, what would you use?
Mind blowing, without pause or hesitation.
Yeah.
I think in terms of emojis these days.
Mhm.
And so the emoji that comes to me is the little guy that is having his mind blown, which I use quite frequently. Yeah, so mind blown. My favorite emojis, by the way, for your viewers, are the forward facing fist emoji, the fire emoji, the rocket emoji, and the mind blown emoji, just for so we can get to know each other a little bit better.
And those
That's
are all in the notifications on all of
always.
the WhatsApp
Yes.
groups. So that
Yeah.
makes sense. Awesome. This was so good and so informative. And I'm glad I got to talk off of psychedelics today with you because this is literally transforming the world. So thank you so much for doing what you do and bringing what you are bringing to the world, because I know it's going to make a huge impact. And you're leaving this big event that is coming up right now with the world
Yeah.
leaders.
I go to Dubai to speak on stage at the Global Citizens Forum for world leaders and influencers and journalists and billionaire philanthropists and Saudi princes and God only knows who else. And so we get to talk about 9D from the world stage, which is very exciting.
It's going to be epic. I cannot wait to hear all about it.
Thank you
Awesome.
for the time, Jess. It's good to be here.
Thank you, Brian. This was awesome.